Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Florence Hudson, and I'm happy to welcome you to Workshop 5 of the Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity Workshop Series that's co-sponsored by the IEEE Standards Association and the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub at Columbia University. This Workshop 5 is Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity Technology and Policy, and we're delighted to have incredible speakers, panelists with us today. So we'll just do a few opening remarks. As I mentioned, I'm working at the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub at Columbia University. I'll tell you more about that. I am also on the IEEE Engineering and Medicine Biology Society Standards Committee, and I lead a working group you're going to hear more about in this whole space. And I'd like Maria Palombini to quickly introduce herself. She is really the reason that we're having this great workshop series. Maria?
So hi, everyone. Thank you, Florence. Of course, always, it's been an absolute delight collaborating with you on this 5-part series. And I want to welcome everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I do lead the healthcare and life sciences practice here at the IEEE Standards Association. And through this collaborative work, we reach out to volunteers like we have on our panel today, but as well as many of you around the globe to join the efforts in helping us to drive trusted adoption of new technologies and applications to ultimately impact and enhance better patient care. So with that, Florence has been, she leads a great standards working group, and the point of this series to really get to the core of the challenges that are hanging above our head with cybersecurity.
Absolutely. And thank you, Maria, for your partnership. Would you like to do a little overview about IEEE and the Standards Association before I jump into the Big Data Hub?
Oh, yes, of course. So for those of you who are not familiar with the organization, the IEEE is actually the way we pronounce it, and it's the Institute of Electronic and Electrical Engineers. All of the work we do, whether it's in standards or technical activities, outreach, education, is always tied to our core mission, which is tied to advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. We are a large organization. We are actually over 100 years old as well. We're represented in 160 countries. We have over 420,000 members globally across many different technical disciplines and many different industry domains. So the work we do, Florence, if you don't mind, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Some of you may be familiar. You might have attended one of our conferences across the many technical societies and councils that host them, or read one of our documents on IEEE Explore. All of the work we do is really focused on not only just the current technologies, but how do we look forward to the future of technologies, regardless of the domain or technical discipline we are in. Next slide, thank you. So as I mentioned, our core mission is advancing technology for humanity, and it impacts every aspect of the work we do across our global organization. And of course, in healthcare life sciences, that's an important area. So this is where we are focused most heavily. Next slide, please. So healthcare life sciences, we're focused on 3 core branches, they're all priority 1 because they're all critical to the value chain. We have pharma biotech, which looks at everything from bench to distribution of therapeutics, anything from clinical trials, manufacturing, and overall clinical research. Clinical health, we look at the technologies in actual healthcare delivery, diagnostics, and even going back to R&D. And then global wellness looks at a very dynamic area of response to environmental situations. So we look at the global pandemic, we look at food security and food sustainability. Obviously, we're looking at also the impact of mental health, specifically looking at digital therapeutics. So it's our most dynamic, but also it's the one that's really targeting the most contemporary issues that we're seeing throughout the global ecosystem. Ultimately, the goal for our mission is to improve societal outcomes. So we have many different paths to standards here. Most of our work in healthcare life science sits in this little world called industry connections, because we incubate a great part of the work. It's a great opportunity for people to collaborate, to test a concept if they have a pre-standard idea, they're not sure if it's a true standard yet, or just to pilot a best practice to see where it can go. So this is where a great deal of our work sits. And then we actually have standardization projects, as Florence is going to highlight a little bit later on, in the area of actually developing standards to address those challenges that can work globally and universally for the intended outcome. And we have conformity assessment, which is a, obviously certification, if you will, based on standards we developed and registries as well. And open source is one of our most rapidly accelerating programs here, open source standards and actually nurturing open source projects. Great. And with that, I hand it back to Florence.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for your leadership and partnership as always. So I'm Executive Director of the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub, which is one of 4 big data innovation hubs funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. And we're situated, headquartered at Columbia University. Our job is to be a community convener, collaboration hub, and catalyst for data science innovation, addressing real-world challenges through translational data science. We have 4 focus areas at our hub. One is education data literacy, another is health, another is urban to rural communities, and then the last is responsible data science, including security, privacy, and ethics. So as you can see, the Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity Workshop Series, which today's event is part of, actually is squarely involved in the health area as well as responsible data science with security, privacy, and ethics. So this was a wonderful partnership that we developed with IEEE this year. We're very grateful for it. This is the 5th workshop in the series, and we're looking at what we're going to be doing in 2022, and Maria will talk more about that at the end. So throughout this series, which was sponsored by IEEE SA, we call it, the Standards Association, as well as the working group that I lead, which is actually the first working group to be co-developing a standard between IEEE and UL, or Underwriters Laboratories. It's called P2933, and it's a working group for clinical IoT, data and device interoperability with TIPPSS. TIPPSS stands for trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. And we've been developing this framework since the beginning of 2016 with IEEE, starting with an event at in Washington, D.C. I think it was George Washington University, and we've been building it since then. And I'll talk about industry connections and the actual standards work. And then it's also co-sponsored by the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub. And our goal throughout this workshop series and going into next year and beyond is to develop a roadmap, including standards to improve connected healthcare cybersecurity. As you all probably know, every device is discoverable and hackable, pretty much. So what we want to do is understand what the risks are, what the challenges are, and what the opportunities are to make things better. So we had 4 workshops so far this year. The first one on global connected healthcare, cybersecurity risks and roadmap. The next on privacy, ethics, and trust in connected healthcare. The next on data and device identity, validation, interoperability, and then connected healthcare integrated systems, which have all been building up to today's discussion on connected healthcare technology and policy considerations. If you would like to either listen on demand or look at the reports that were created out of these other workshops, you can view them at the Global Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity webpage. And I especially want to thank Macy, who is a student at Columbia University, a grad student who's on the call with us today, who has actually created all of these reports for us. And it's really wonderful to have students involved because, as we know, they're the future. And we have a special thanks to our virtual workshop series advisory board. You can see our faces here, including Macy's. And we represent a broad range of institutions and people from around the world. NADA is in the UK. We have people in the US. We have other people in other parts of Europe, in the EU, and we have people in academia as well as in hospitals and in commercial areas. So it's really important that we have everybody's opinion as we try to handle these challenges together. A few quick webinar housekeeping items. Upon entering the webinar, you have been automatically muted. If you could stay on mute if you're not speaking, we'd appreciate that to reduce the background noise, whether it's a dog or your baby or the cars or whatever, that would be appreciated. If you're experiencing technical issues, use the attendee chat feature and message the host for help troubleshooting. And if you want to pose questions to the speaker, we ask you to use the attendee chat because then they could either answer it live or they could answer it asynchronously in the chat. So that will be really helpful. So let's review our agenda today. So we started at 11 Eastern, and we appreciate you being here. Now we're going to go into, in a couple of minutes, into the main panel session, and we're going to get global perspectives on technology and policy regarding connected healthcare cybersecurity. And that's going to be enabled by our 3 panelists, Dr. Bob Greboyes, Dr. Tomas Heidegger, and Jennifer Stoll. Bob is actually a health economist focused on technology and innovation and a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University in the US. Dr. Tomas Heidegger is associate professor and director for the University Research Innovation Center at Obuda University. He's an IEEE senior member, an associate VP for industrial activities and IEEE Robotics and Automation Society, and he's in the IEEE Hungary section. So he's the chair of that, and so he comes to us from the European Union. Jen Stoll is Executive Vice President for Government Relations and Public Affairs at OCHIN, which is a very interesting organization that you're going to learn more about. So we're going to have them presenting, but we have some fun interactive polls to keep it kind of interesting for you. We really want your opinion on things, and we want to make sure this is a very interactive event. So after they speak and we do a few polls, then we'll have open facilitation with the audience, and some of our speakers and panelists from prior events are going to be joining us, which we're really excited about. And it's for everyone to discuss the challenges and opportunities in this space. So quickly before I hand it over to actually probably the first poll, let me just give you a little overview of some of the standards work that we have been doing in this space of connected healthcare cybersecurity. When Maria talked about the IEEE Standards Association, you may recall in the top left of the slide, it talked about the Industry Connections Program, and then it talked about standards and working groups. So when Maria and I first met a number of years ago, we started talking about, and we had in 2016, we actually had the first TIPPSS event where we created TIPPSS at George Washington University in DC. We started thinking about what would a TIPPSS framework look like? How do we ensure trust, identity, privacy, protection and safety, and security in connected healthcare devices, especially for the plethora of clinical Internet of Things devices and the interoperability of the data. So through the Industry Connections Program, we created a pre-standards activity, and we created this initial framework for clinical IoT and data interoperability with TIPPSS. We've actually also been publishing books on this. There's actually a Springer book out there that I was editor of with 17 women authors called Women Securing the Future with TIPPSS for IoT. And we have one expected at the beginning of 2022 on women securing the future with TIPPSS for connected healthcare. But the purpose of this was really to look at, as responsible technologists, policy leaders, deployers of systems, and users as well, what do we need to be thinking about to ensure trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security in connected healthcare? So we always start with the client, the user experience, user interface at the top. That could be the patients, the providers, the payers, the regulators, pharmaceutical, even the devices or things that, need an interface and research. So there are many people involved. There are the applications themselves, from precision medicine to AI, ML, and real-time medical device actuation. There's an integration layer with many standards. As they say, the beauty about standards is that there are so many of them. But there are a number of things that are already in use in this space, and we have to make sure we're connecting to them, but create something extensible for the future. There are application programming interfaces and software development kits, APIs and SDKs. There's the opportunity for potential use of distributed ledger technology. There are connection layers, data ingest and management, and then the actual data sources and targets that, if you're leveraging a distributed ledger technology, could be on a chain or off a chain. There are many things to consider. And then up and down the right here, you see we always have to make sure we're taking into consideration security, leveraging encryption, federated identity management, key management for security, user management, authentication, privacy, compliance, governance at the hardware, firmware, software, application, and service level. There's so many things to think about, but that's why we have groups like the P2933 Clinical IoT Data and Device Interoperability Working Group. We have over 240 people from 30 countries around the planet working on this together. And you could read more about the pre-standards report through IEEE as well. So this kind of created the frame for, gosh, what do we have to think about if we're going to address connected healthcare cybersecurity, and there are technology and policy considerations. So now that we have a little overview of everything, what we'd like to do is go to our first audience poll question. And so Christina is going to be doing that. So if you could answer the question, it should be on your screen in a little pop-up. How likely is it that regulatory policy at the country, state, or regional level will be a catalyst for technology innovations and collaboration in solving connected healthcare, cybersecurity, and privacy issues? And please just choose one. Very likely, somewhat unlikely, or unlikely. So we'll wait another few seconds. I think that's pretty good. I think we can end the poll now and show the results. Okay. Oh, look at that. We have optimists on with us today. That's wonderful. So somewhat likely wins, and then very likely comes in next, then somewhat unlikely, and then unlikely. So I'd like to ask the panelists, do you have any comments about this, about these results? Do you agree with these or disagree?
Well, this is Bob. Actually, I ended up clicking somewhat likely. I almost clicked somewhat unlikely, and I'm at another moment I might have done that. And that's what I'll be talking about.
Very good. Yeah. So I think it's great, though. A lot of people think somewhat likely. I think that's very cool that policy could actually help us, which is wonderful. And Jen, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I actually disagree with Bob. I think it's very likely that policy will be driving, at least here in the United States, around cybersecurity, and putting incentives out there to align with what we're trying to drive.
And that's the beauty of a panel, is everyone gets an opinion, and it serves us so well because the audience probably looks at this very differently too. And so we each get to tease out how we see it. Tomas, did you have a comment?
And I can only confirm what Jen said, that in the EU is actually working on these policies, and they want to make sure that we feel safe. So no matter whether there is a disagreement on the national level, more or less, they're going to just make us face the right direction altogether.
Very good. Well, this has been exciting already. I love when we have different opinions. That's just great. So that was our first question, and we've just shared the results. So now that we have a feel for how we see different things, thank you very much, Christina. Now we'd like to go to today's expert panel. And you've already heard a little bit from each of them. So Dr. Robert Graboyes is at George Mason University, Dr. Tomas Heidegger in Hungary at Óbuda University, and then Jen Stoll at Ochen. So the way we're going to proceed is that we're going to have each of the panelists speak for up to 10 minutes about their opinions about connected healthcare cybersecurity, technology and policy considerations, the good, the bad, and the ugly, whatever they'd like to share. And so Dr. Graboyes will go first. And so I'd like to let him proceed. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can see him on the screen. Go ahead, Bob.
Sure. Well, good morning. So as Florence said, I'm a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University in Virginia. My writings and my research focus on healthcare, and I'm not an engineer. I'm the outsider in the group. I'm an economist, though I did join IEEE after we started this. So today we're going to be talking about virtual care. We're going to be talking about issues related to privacy, cybersecurity, and at least I think we're going to be talking a bit about equity. And in this brief segment, I'm going to talk about what I write about all the time, which is to repeat and reinforce a phrase dating back at least 300 years in one form or another: don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that has a lot to do with why I answered the question the way I did. So first of all, to say telehealth, virtual health is remarkable technology. I've already experienced this in my family. My 92-year-old mother was rushed to the hospital, and her life was saved because she was having a conversation with my nephew, who's a doctor, who noticed odd things in her face and realized she was in septic shock without even feeling sick. So in a sense, a little bit of amateur telehealth saved her life and gave her an extra year and a half to live. And on the other hand, I have experienced heart arrhythmia one time, and having connected devices that allow me to take an EKG, monitor it, and get immediate results and shoot them to doctors has kept me out of the emergency room any number of times when I didn't need to go. And these are just the tip of the iceberg. The number of devices coming on stream is just astounding. And there haven't been a whole lot of problems with these yet. Probably won't be backsliding. COVID exploded the use of this stuff, and I don't think we're ever going to go back to where we were 2 years ago. However, I would say, and again, taking that usually ascribed to Voltaire quote about the perfect is the enemy of the good, I also am a proud member of the cult of the imperfect. Robert Watson Watt, who helped develop radar in Britain at the start of World War II, said you should always send the military your third best option, because the second best is going to arrive too late and the first best is never going to arrive. So he said, accept that we're going to be imperfect. I have a colleague here at Mercatus, Adam Thierer, who has helped popularize, I don't know, he may have invented the expression permissionless innovation, which is the antithesis of the precautionary principle. These are the sort of default settings. The precautionary principle is don't let a technology out until you're really sure that it's okay. Permissionless innovation is unless you're really sure it's not okay, let it out and deal with the problems as we go along. And as Adam says, living in constant fear of worst case scenarios and premising public policy upon them means that best case scenarios will never come about. And again, the reason I answered my question and I was ambivalent there is because very often that precautionary principle kicks in and we deep six technologies just because we're just not 100% sure that they're going to be safe. So in this realm, you can be sure there are going to be breaches of privacy and cybersecurity. And if you premise the release of devices on the idea that we're going to make sure that nothing bad ever happens, they're never going to see the light of day. So of course we should take precautions and minimize them. And I'm certainly not of the ilk that would say, let's not have any regulations, let's just let it all go out there and have the Wild West. But the default setting should be to let things out unless you're pretty sure there's a problem, but take precautions. We must expect them. The questions we should be asking are, how do we mitigate the problems when they happen? How do you compensate people who are wronged when they do happen? How do you investigate and punish those who do the wrong? And a lot of it's going to be a matter of extemporizing. It's going to be going along as we go, a good third best policy. And on the other side, again, and I think we're going to get into it a bit, we talked about it in our private conversations about the idea of equity, the idea that, well, we want telemedicine to be available to everyone in the United States, or for that matter, everyone in the world. And just as with cybersecurity, if you premise it on, we're not going to get things out there unless we're sure that everybody's going to have it all at once, you're going to assure that nothing gets out there, that these life-saving, life-improving technologies never see the light of day. There have always been inequities in healthcare. There are in every country, in every society, at every time. They're going to continue to be. But that blessed S-curve of innovation, the diffusion of technology, it starts with small groups, it grows rapidly, and finally we reach the end. And I'll add in that when I lived in New York City, I was at Columbia as well, and then I was an economist for Chase Manhattan Bank, focused on sub-Saharan Africa. And communications was virtually impossible when I would travel there. And now everybody on the continent has a cell phone. That's how they do their banking. That's how they do their healthcare. And again, it wasn't that there was a policy to say everyone must have this on day one. It was just a diffusion process. So I've talked about this seminar with a number of my colleagues, some other economists, some other technologists. In particular, I want to tip my hat to the head of IT where I work, a great fellow named Jim Roniak, who heads up our IT and also is deeply involved in healthcare issues, and in particular in some disadvantaged communities. And what I ascertained from talking to my colleagues is that we don't need a lot of new regulations in these areas, that if we start writing lots and lots of new regs, we're probably going to regulate the technologies out of existence before they even get started. However, we do need standards, and I'll get to that in a minute. One of the problems with laying down too heavy a layer of regulation is that you're going to end up with something that, again, my colleague Adam refers to as technological civil disobedience. There's a group called Night Scout that is a group of people who are both computer programmers and parents of children with severe diabetes. One of them hacked into his child's insulin pump so he could monitor her and keep tabs 24 hours a day on her glucose levels. And their hashtag is "We are not waiting." And they have this interesting relationship with the FDA. And to its credit, the FDA has sort of stepped back and said, you know, as long as you sort of stay in your space and don't sell these things and whatever, we're really not going to bother you. But the problem is if the regulators get too heavy-handed in it, people will rebel and just do things. And that has its own negative implications as well. And I would say that the best place to look for how we should proceed on these things is to look at the birth of the internet. If you look around 1990, 1991, there was more or less a bipartisan consensus in Congress that we need to really lay down heavy-duty regulations before this thing really gets out there. And remarkably, Congress flipped. Both parties switched from the precautionary principle to permissionless innovation, which said, you know what, let the internet happen. We're going to lay out these protocols, hope that people use them. There are going to be problems. We're going to deal with them as they go along. I think it's really one of the most remarkable political science stories of my lifetime. And I think that the wisdom is that we ought to proceed in a similar way. Lay down new standards, and the IEEE is uniquely positioned to be contributing in this area. And I would say too, standards should be determined competitively, not have IEEE as the one choke point in the system. But, and I'll credit this to my friend Jim, think about Linux, where there were different user groups that set their own standards, and you were able to have some sort of a competition among different spheres, people using it in different ways. And finally, to understand the diffusion process, to understand that every technology starts out with its dangers, with its inequities, but eventually spreads and becomes universal. And with that, I'm at 10 minutes, and let's go to everyone else.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was very interesting. And there are people who've hacked their own insulin pumps, very famously, some other folks that are actually technologists, and there are videos of that on the internet. And what's important is that if there are hackable opportunities, the device manufacturers ask people to report them so that they know about them, so they can try to close them down. And there's a group called DEF CON. We have a cybersecurity hackers conference every year. It's good to see how the hackers work if you want to protect yourself from them. So I get involved in that, and I speak at the Biohacking Village, and I'm going to, I co-lead a security leaders village. And, we talk about all these challenges and issues and how we can do it better together. And there's another organization people may be interested called IamTheCavalry.org. And very famously, a number of years ago, a gentleman who created this organization was at DEF CON and said, so all this stuff is hackable and the cavalry is not coming. For those who aren't in the US, those were the people who came in on their horses and protected everybody, like, decades and centuries ago. And he said, the cavalry is not coming, we are the cavalry. And so that's a very similar idea. And they actually have a Hippocratic oath for medical device security. Very interesting. So some of you may be interested in looking at that. And they're really very easy to work with. They're great folks. So we're all on the same page on that. So now, Bob, that was a great discussion. Thank you very much. Now, Tomas, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And really funny that I put down three words along which I would like to move forward and really present the whole telehealth issue: reliability, trust, and accountability. And I was very happy to hear how we can now tap together, Robin, just like the way we want to move forward. I think we have to put everything into the aspect of globalization. Because one thing is really the commerce and how goods are moving around the globe easily. But what we are seeing here in terms of availability of technology and ideas, this is real globalization. We have only seen the bits of it, and especially coronavirus and the whole lockdown situation accelerated and exposed it. So what do I mean there? So in Europe, probably you're all aware that since this May, there is the medical device regulation. So the EU decided 5 years ago that they would push very hard forward, and they would impose many of these requirements on the medical device manufacturers before we actually got there. For example, AI containing medical devices, there's a long list of requirements in terms of data protection, data privacy, data storage, how medical device manufacturers are now supposed to keep us safe. But we don't know what we're going to do about it, but it's already there, and that causes a lot of headaches, of course. But imagine that the whole turnout of this MDR, the new regulation, is just because there was a French company, PIP, who implanted hundreds of thousands, well, altogether up to 2 million implants, breast implants over the course of 10 years. Some of those turned out to be faulty. So if you imagine that an event that affected tens of thousands of people could make an EU, a continent, change their regulation, what's going to be the effect when it turns out that a telehealth application, which immediately gets to millions, if not hundreds of millions of people, going to crash on us, or someone really hacks into it? And I think this is really the threat that we have to be very worried about and be preventive of. So when we talk about how do we embrace new technology, I say we need reliability. We really need the standards, we really need FDA, we really need the CE marking and everything behind, and we really need those established standards which help the manufacturers altogether to produce products that we can rely, hopefully. And it's not, there's no guarantee, as Bob very well said, but we can trust them already, and trust will lead to adoption. And adoption means that we start generating business. And I think it's very important that we call on business, because without generating revenue, and we have seen it. So for example, my research field is in medical robotics, especially in surgical robotics. And we took a good 10, 15 years of research products in the 1990s, when because of FDA was not sure how to approve them or whether to approve them, companies could not survive on the market. And that really lagged the technology. Maybe it's good for us by now because everything got more matured, but we cannot or may not want to risk, or we risk maybe a lot more, like in the case of stem cell research, like how we can, like the Western would lose its edge to some other geographic areas. So we really have to be careful about that, elevate the trust on the reliable products so that we have better adoption. And then comes accountability. So if we have to step back, because if something goes wrong, we really have to make sure that we have those kind of safety procedures and processes in place, so we know whose fault was that. Well, not just to play the blame game, but really to be able to change the system, change the practices, and save what we can. So for that, we really need the post-market surveillance that, again, now compulsory in the EU as well. And I think it's a really good thing that companies need to monitor the performance of their devices. I would really be happy to see more of these individual or kind of like professional organization-driven associations or other organizations looking into fast reaction, like a rapid task force. So if something goes wrong, who we could call? 911. I don't think they're gonna help. Like, yes, what's wrong? Like I'm being hacked, and what do they say then? Like unplug yourself. No. So being connected all the time with all this wireless coverage we are receiving, it's not gonna be possible to simply physically distance ourselves. We have to get prepared for that. So I'm a strong believer that we have to act together. We have to be very mindful about which ways we are allowing our companies to drive our technology. But of course, we can't stop technology, and we should not backdrive technology. With the standards, we do have a good chance to promote good practices or even best practices in some cases. And I'm very happy that I've been part of IEEE Standards Association for probably a decade now. And we were first to put down the first robotic standards, first ontological standards there, gradually allowing people to speak the same language. And when it comes to telehealth and medical devices, I think the 7000, which just got approved earlier this year, is a really great example of what guidelines, what really clues we can provide to ethically aligned design principles. So those people and those manufacturers who do want to follow such things, we can give them some advice. And we can have like tremendous branches of that. Like I've been actively working on the 7007 standard of IEEE, which is focusing on robotics and autonomous systems. how do we provide an ontology-based solution to keep them trustworthy, to keep them transparent, to make sure that there can be reliability, there can be trust, and eventually accountability. Thank you.
Tomas and Bob, wow, that was so interesting. You're making me think so much. I can barely talk because my brain is so busy thinking about everything you talked about. And with the robotics and the autonomous systems, that's, you know, where clinical IoT is going, right? There is a lot of robotics, there's sensing and actuating. You know, sense is when you sense, actuate is sense when you actuate is when you actually make something happen. And you have to make sure that you're making the right thing happen, right? And there's so many considerations. So thank you very much for sharing all of that. So what we're going to do now is just to recap, you know, where we've been. We had Dr. Bob Gerboyas present. He's a health economist focused on technology innovation at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. We had Tomas present from Hungary, associate professor and a director of the University Research and the Innovation Center, and an IEEE senior member and a leader in some of the standards work. And now what we'd like to do is go to our second poll. And so, Christina, if you could please put up the second polling question, which will be, which areas of policy do you feel are most important to connected healthcare cybersecurity? And you can choose all but apply. So please, if you could answer the poll, that would be great. And if you want to click on other, you can answer what you think about when you think of other in the chat, please. Very good. More than half of us have responded. We'll wait for a few more. Very good. It looks like we have, oh yeah, we had one person just join if you want to answer the poll on demand. Okay, very good. Good. So we're at about 3/4 of who are here. So let's see what the answers are. And so if we share the results, we'll see that when we look at which areas of policy we feel are most important to connected healthcare, cybersecurity, and privacy, as you would imagine, security is one of the top ones, same word. Trust and identity, which is very related to security and privacy, which we'll talk about. Protection and safety, and different people look at protection and safety in different ways. You know, our working group on TIPPSS, trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security, has dozens of countries in it. And people remind me that in their language, like, you know, in Spanish, safety and security are the same word, you know, and so we look at things differently. Protection, I think of protection as at the design in level. How do you design it for protection? And then safety on the ongoing use, but different people have different perspectives. We'd love to hear what that is. And then, so we have security and trust and identity at the top. Close second place tie are privacy and protection and safety. And then we have interoperability and data sharing. And then I'm going to stop sharing so I can look at the chat. But I would like to hear from our panelists, you know, what you think about these answers and what your perspectives are on what the most important policy areas are for connected healthcare cybersecurity.
Well, this is Bob. I put down all of the above. Simply, they're all important, and I'm not sure I know how to pick one versus the other.
Good. That's why we call it TIPPSS. I'm glad you agree. Trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. I totally agree with you. I think it's very interesting, as Tomas was saying, that the policy has already driven, you know, things on the technology side. I think that's what you were saying before, Tomas.
Indeed. And one thing I would like to comment on, I'm not sure it's a good thing, but we tend to give up more and more on like privacy for security. So if you think of like 20 years ago, 25 CCTV cameras everywhere, that would have been outrageous for most of our citizens. Now we feel safe of that. You know, having a big brother watching all our activities online seems really weird. Nowadays we wish for that because we want to feel safe. We know we are getting observed anyway in a legal or illegal manner, and then we want to know who's at the other end of that line. So I think it's changing on a global scale how we approach that.
I agree with you. There are cultural changes going on and expectations and comfort levels, as you said. So I think there will continue to be changes. I know I was speaking, I wasn't speaking at an event, at an event with Sonia Sotomayor, who's one of the Supreme Court justices in the United States. And she and I went to the same college, and we were at an event on campus at Princeton. And so I asked her, I said, I'm interested in what you think about Internet of Things, privacy and security, because I'm working on the security part. And she said, well, I'm glad you are, because I'm working on privacy, because I don't think our citizens realize the civil rights that they're giving up when they use these technologies. And so that gave me comfort that she's thinking of it that way, as, sitting on the highest court in the land in the United States. So I agree with you that we need to think about it. We're becoming more comfortable with it. But we need to understand it better, what we are giving up, and I think it depends on your situation at the time. Like Bob, you were talking about, depending on your medical situation, like my brother, may he rest in peace, he passed away from cancer earlier this year. But he was like, use all my data, give it to everybody, keep me alive, go for it, right? And so when you're in that situation, you're like, yeah, take my biomarkers, take everything, whatever you want. If you can do something to help me, go for it. But then some people don't feel that way, or maybe they don't feel that they can, or that they don't have to. So I think it also depends on your situation, what you're comfortable with. But I think it's really exciting that policy can actually influence technology, because sometimes we usually say, well, policy is such a laggard, it's way behind the technology, but we actually are seeing some situations where the policy is kind of inspiring the technology, which is very interesting.
You don't mind my saying something, comment on what you said there. I use the analogy that I've been given of Linux, that there are different standards for different groups. And I think that's very much related to what you said. There are going to be people who want to be like your brother and say, I don't care, put my data out there. There are others who are going to be, I don't want anyone to have it. And I would not like a world where we say it's going to be one size fits all. There's one standard, and that's what everyone is going to live by, regardless of your personal preferences. And I guess as an economist, I have to throw in that what really matters is to have the incentives in place to make these things work.
I agree. Very good point, Bob. And I'm sure we'll get into that some more. And then one of the participants put into the chat, protection and safety must take precedence. Dead patients are not the goal. Been there, done that. It wasn't pretty. Yeah, so we know that. And actually, that's what we talk about. Maria has actually run some podcasts before, and she and I were on one where we were talking about this P2933 group and TIPPSS. And I said, our goal is to keep the humans alive. That's our goal. And privacy is very important as well. So on that note, now that we have had our second polling question, what I would like to do is to introduce our next presenter, who is Jennifer Stoll. And let me share so people can actually read what she does as well. Share my screen quickly. So Jennifer Stoll goes by Jen. She's Executive Vice President for Government Relations and Public Affairs at OCHIN, which is the Oregon Community Health Information Network in the US. And their reach is rather broad, so it's a little deceptive that they're called Oregon, I think. That's one of the things I think I've learned so far. So Jen, we would love to hear your perspective now on connected healthcare, cybersecurity, technology, and policy.
Great. Thank you, Florence. Thank you, Maria. And thank you for including me and part of this esteemed panel. To help set the frame, I'd like to share a couple of slides on who we are and who we serve. I think that might be helpful for this group. And hopefully you can see my screen and my slides.
Looks great. Thank you.
Excellent. Yep. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. What I'm going to share today, it will be a little bit different from Tomas and others, but it all is aligned together, and sharing a little bit about what we're seeing on a real world basis in serving in the United States. And apologies for my ex-US friends. I'll do my best, and I'm so glad Tomas is on this panel too. To talk about what we're seeing in terms of cybersecurity and what we are advocating as a national organization. And Florence, FYI, we do not use the Oregon Community Health Information Network. About 10 years ago, we changed our name to OCHIN. And who we are is a not-for-profit healthcare innovation center. And we are a large network of the United States' most serving those that are serving the most underserved communities across the country. So we work with public health departments, health centers called federally qualified health centers, which is a federal designation for those serving low income and uninsured. We work with corrections facilities, those that are justice involved. We work with hospitals that are called rural critical access hospitals. These are hospitals in very rural areas that don't have the resources to be able to necessarily have big cyber teams like our big, more sophisticated organizations in large cities. So we support those with the least amount of resources, and cyber is a big threat to the most under-resourced in communities, predominantly from lack of resources and the lack of staffing to be able to support this work. So our work is broken up into 3 different buckets that I won't linger here too much. We are best known for the technology support. We host electronic health records. We, during the pandemic, helped 22,000 providers across the country become up and running within 6 weeks on telehealth platforms, integrated telehealth platforms. We help them with networking and broadband in some of the most rural, and in the United States, we have what's called frontier areas, which are rural magnified, I guess is the best way to describe it. We also provide a tremendous amount of support services. So we also provide cybersecurity to help help our health centers and what, to be able to try to fend off attacks. And we're also known for a lot of the research that our members that we have, including we recently were awarded NIH, one of the lead anchors institutions for the Aim Ahead award, which is all about artificial intelligence and machine learning in the most under-resourced communities. So we do a lot of research. We're across the country. You can see here, this is a little bit about who we support. And why that's important to this group is in the population that our members serve, these are patients that are the most medically and socially complex patients in the country. We have 100,000 patients in our network that we support that are unhoused. We continue to have a growing veterans population in our communities, in our clinics. The vast majority of folks that are served identify as people of color. And language barriers are a big challenge. There are well over 100 languages spoken in the clinics that we support. So technology has to be culturally competent to really reach patients. So with that, I'm going to just stop sharing real quick. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the work that I do, if I can figure out how to stop sharing. Hold on one second. Thank you. The work that I do in providing an advocacy voice in Washington, D.C. and in state governments across the country, to be able to raise the awareness around the need for digital frameworks to be able to support our health centers and those that they're serving with the least amount of resources. We are advancing a national strategy to combat cybersecurity, and in May of 2021, there was the Biden administration issued an executive order to improve the federal government's efforts to identify, deter, protect against, and respond to cyber threats. And we're really believing that this is the first of multiple things that need to happen at a federal level to provide a national framework to be able to support those with the least amount of resources, to be able to address this threat that is actually on them right now. And I think it's also an important context that to understand that our members are also at a crisis in terms of their workforce. We are seeing 30 to 40% vacancy rates at health centers across the country in just their regular workforce, never mind thinking about cyber attacks during the pandemic. Our workforce, our healthcare workforce is exhausted and never before. And one of the areas that we're trying to create urgency around on a federal level is the need to be able to provide the supports and the frameworks to be able to address these challenges that are on our members at the moment. So, you know, our lens is a little bit different because we are working with the most medically and socially complex patient population in the United States. And what we're advocating for to drive a national strategy to combat cyber strange and then be able to provide more technical assistance and support for those that are serving the nation's most underserved. We also believe that a lot of the funding that went into recently public health modernization could also be used to help support some of this work. So I'll stop here, but I think it's just important. My frame is coming a little bit differently than Bob and from Tomas, but I am really looking forward to this discussion because health equity is in our core. And I will stop there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing that. And it's really so impressive, the reach that OCHIN has. I think it's just great. And it's the breadth, but the depth, you know, of how you serve the underserved and how you have an eye on equity and you have an eye on where we need to be focusing more, because people can be, you know, cannot see those things. And so it's very nice that you bring those up. So thank you for sharing all that. So what we would like to do now is go to our third polling question, and Christine is going to put that up. And I can, excellent. Oh, that's number 2. So there's number 3. So it's which areas of policy do you think have the most promise that we might focus on together in connected healthcare, cybersecurity, and privacy, leveraging the IEEE community? So we have privacy, we have security, we have trust and identity, protection and safety, data sharing, interoperability, and all of the above. So if you could answer that, that would be great. And that should be on your screen. We'll also put it up on the PowerPoint. So which areas of policy do you think have the most promise that we might focus on together, like prioritize, so maybe we can make more impact more quickly in connected healthcare, cybersecurity, and privacy, and leveraging IEEE? Okay. That half have participated. We'll wait for a few more folks to participate, please. And this isn't a test. It's not who's right or wrong. It's just, you know, your opinion, and your opinion you can change. You know, that's your prerogative too. Just what you're thinking now. Maybe a few more people. Thinking. Maybe another few seconds. Okay, great. So maybe we can end the poll and share the results. Excellent. So for which areas do we think have the most promise from a policy perspective? We have security at the top. Yay! One of my biggest issues and concerns. And I think one of the opportunities we can address with standards and with technology. Then we have privacy, trust and identity, which has a lot of, there's a lot going on in trust and identity. I look forward to getting into that even more. And then we have protection and safety. Oh, yep. And then we have data sharing and interoperability are tied. And actually, all of the above came in ahead of data sharing interoperability. So I agree with you. Nobody said none. That's great. So we all believe there's some promise. That makes me really happy. So why don't we talk about some of these results? First of all, I'm glad that nobody said none. But then if our panelists, and I think we may have some of our prior panelists or speakers who joined us as well that might want to chime in. I think William Harding is on the line with us, who is one of the co-vice chairs for the IEEE UL P2933 working group. And he works at a medical device manufacturer, and he's very knowledgeable on a lot of these spaces. I think he's here. We have a few others. I think Chanel might be joining us, some people from the working group. But I'd like to hear first from the panelists that we had today. Any comments on these results?
Well, again, I'm an economist, and we're famous for saying on the other hand, so I did all of the above because they gave me a whole lot of other hands. But really, I think these things are so interwoven that it's sort of tough to deal with one of them and ignoring the other. So I think it's sort of an all-in.
So Florence, I'd love to jump in on this. As much as I'd love to think we're going to have a privacy discussion here in the United States anytime soon to align multiple different privacy constructs, I don't know if we've experienced enough pain enough in this space as a nation to address it. It's too complicated. And I don't see this Congress picking it up anytime in the near future, as much as I would love to have that debate. But foundationally, trust, it has to be the biggest thing that they focus on. And I'm hoping that by setting a national framework, it will help establish trust. That's what I'm hoping for. At least that's what we are advocating, because we can see very clearly what happens in the healthcare delivery system when there's no trust. And we've seen that play out in the pandemic. So.
Yeah. And what is it that you actually see when there is no trust? Is it that people don't get the health care so that they're at greater risk? Or what is it that you see as a result of that?
Well, I'll give you an example. And it's not related per se to cyber, but it's related to the public health response around vaccines and being able to understand what data is being shared in the vaccine response and with whom. It's a trust issue, I think, foundationally. There's also a big technology component too, where we have disparate systems in different places, but trust has to be there, and it has to be guided and led to. And I'm hopeful that in this space, we can come together in cyberspace, in the cybersecurity world, that we can come together and create trust, at least in the United States, and that might extend across the globe. We'll see.
I can only second Jen from that aspect, because I think it would be wishful thinking to believe that we can solve privacy issues, we can solve security issues. So I think the question already, like promise for might be doing something, I think it clearly shows like how uncertain we are about the outcome of that. So in my understanding, or if you want to go pragmatic, where we can do most currently, I strongly believe that that's data sharing and interoperability. So if we think about standards, that's why we can and should push things, should push community, technology leaders and followers, so that we get a better system altogether.
Very interesting that you honed in on data sharing and interoperability. Why do you think that has more promise at this point?
Just think about medical imaging. When the 4 big manufacturers, until they decided that they share their patents and make their devices talk to each other, it was impossible to get one scan brought to another hospital and get checked with that data. It was impossible to do a quality care where you have multiple stages of getting different doctors, different opinions. I think the real promise of telehealth is that we can become connected in terms of that whatever data, whatever knowledge we can gain from anywhere in the world on any system, that will be part of a huge puzzle putting together what's wrong with us or what's good with us. And for that, we really need to have that fixed, that under security, of course, and under privacy conditions, but these systems can talk to each other. And I'm, as a patient, entitled and empowered to carry over my data with myself from one doctor to another, from one treatment or one country to another. until this is done really smoothly from the technology point of view, it's just really hard. I mean, I have to print all my records and carry it over from Europe to the United States if I want to get something. And here we still at some in better places, you get a CD with your scan. Like, can you imagine that? What do I do with a CD nowadays?
I know.
Florence, I'd like to jump to in here. As many here in the United States know, we are in the throes of, implementing the 21st Century Cures Act and the interoperability rule of that legislation. That and what the Office of the National Coordinator is working on with TEFCA, the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement. Those are two big items that are aggressively moving forward and not slowing down anytime in the near future. And thou shall not data block is really the law of the land at this point. So I am very optimistic about interoperability and what we're capable of doing in that space. We have a long way to go but I think there's a lot of opportunity. However, it's interesting in the United States, one of the biggest obstacles are the disparate privacy structures that we have in place and data sharing around what is protected, what is not, and how does that move? So that conversation continues to happen, but I'm very encouraged that we are going to get to a really good place in interoperability in the next 2 to 3 years.
That is excellent.
Hi, everyone. This is William, and Florence, go ahead and finish. I wanted to add a point once you have a second.
Wonderful. Yes, William, I would love you to pop in. So William is a co-vice chair of P2933, the TIPPSS working group that we have for clinical IoT. And so William, we'd love to hear your point of view. Thanks for jumping in.
Oh, my pleasure. Actually, you guys, you're playing the strings of my guitar here. These are all interesting to me. Specifically, I like the conversation around interoperability. So I'm going to take an approach from the largest medical device manufacturer in the world, Medtronic. And so I look at it from the point of interoperability and manufacturing medical devices to interoperability within surgical environments. And so when I look at this, it does appear to be insurmountable as a mountain of things we have to do. But if we really look at the core constituents, the elements that are driving the framework that's built off of things that drive privacy, security, and so on, is interoperability, ultimately with the intent for data sharing, so transformation of data. When we look at it through the schemas or models of blockchain, AI, we'll say IoT, or even BYOD, bring your own device, these are driving factors across the world right now, specifically because of COVID. And when we look at that, interoperability becomes the key point when we think of federated learning, when we think of distributed systems. But there's a point in time that if you start to look at what we call the unifying of those technologies, you start to see that, yes, okay, the key driving factors are interoperability and data sharing, but ultimately, when I get to it, how do I systematically prioritize these? Do I prioritize trust and identity first? Do I prioritize safety and security second? These type of things are the biggest questions are driven, but through our use cases, where we'll say continuous glucose monitoring or deep brain stimulation, some of these are naturally creating their own priorities. When it comes to a point-to-point, when it comes to any sort of distributor or mesh systems. So the emphasis of this for me is interoperability with data transformation, technology integration as a key point, and then moving sequentially through these to reach them according to like what we might call maturity model.
Excellent, William. And so William actually is a technical fellow, one of the leads of the technical fellow program at Medtronic, and we're very lucky to have him working with us. He always brings so much value and perspective. And so that was really great. And Jenny even said an incredible point, William. Thank you for sharing. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'd like to go back to one point that you made, and I always love to ask this question, especially, for all of our panelists, Bob, and especially Tomas and Jen, based on what you were saying. Jen, you were saying, yeah, privacy, I hope we care more about that in this country. So why did the EU figure it out so much earlier than we are here, or maybe any other region around the planet?
I can take a guess, and it's only a guess because it's something I've written about over the years. The EU has had a very distinctly different system of device approval than the US. In the US, we have the FDA. Any device is going through that one choke point. The EU has had in place a system called notified bodies, where there are multiple approval agencies. They're actually private entities that are somewhat similar to underwriters' laboratories, if you think of a US example. And if you want to get a medical device approved, you pick which notified body you want, and there are, and I haven't written in a couple of years, so I hope none of this is obsolete now, but you would pick the notified body that you wanted, that you thought, so perhaps I want one that is both expert in what I'm doing and gets the job done pretty quickly. You don't want to be the notified body that releases dangerous things. At the same time, you don't want to be the notified body that waits 15 years to do things. So I'm guessing, and it's just my conjecture, that this system is more conducive to finding that than the US, where it all has to go through the same place. And the FDA has strong incentives to delay for safety. They have very few incentives to get things through quickly.
Very interesting.
Let me just jump in.
Yeah.
Sorry, so I think that's just half the story, because the other thing is really about the social insurance system that we are running. So here, if things go wrong, the government is going to pay the price. Because no matter if you spend, the rest of your life under various treatments, still the government is going to pay the bill. And it's unsustainable, clearly. So what they have figured out that unless they make some substantial fundamental changes and push most of the responsibility back to the companies will be popping up with new technologies and risk all that cost falling back on the government and a nationalized healthcare system. In the US, the reason I think that the insurance companies feel more safe because they can drive their own policies to some extent. Therefore, they can decide that, hey, I'm not trusting these new technologies. Like the way for many years they did not embrace robotic surgery because they said it's not paying off. I don't want to deal with that. And the same happening in Europe, but from the centralized level, so that you have a very hard job, actually, if you want to bring some new technology on board. So it plays, in this case, to our advantage because we can build a safer system from the fundamentals. But bringing in new stuff on the top of it, then it's super hard.
That's very interesting because, Bob, when you were talking about incentives before, I wasn't thinking of the government being incented, but Tomas, the way you're talking about it, it's that the government is incented to push this out, So it's actually an incentive for them because it reduces their costs because they have nationalized healthcare. Very interesting. Jen, I see Bob. I'm sorry, what, Bob?
Everybody likes incentives.
I know, the economist speaks, right? Jen, did I see you moving like you wanted to say something as well on this topic?
Well, I would only add, the Europe culturally is very different than the United States. I think that's the foundation that, we haven't had world wars fought on our background and or in our backyard. And I'm married to a German national, and I can tell you his view on privacy is very different than a lot of folks that I work with, just because of historical purposes. So I think there's a big missing link there. And we have a federation in the United States with, with 50 unique different perspectives on privacy. And so even if the Congress were to act, states also act, making things, which also makes things more complicated. So, even if we want national privacy frameworks, the states are going to do things that are in their purviews as well. And we're getting this fragmented structure. So as much as I'd love to say, let's have a national privacy structure, which we do in 3 or 4 different ways, the states are still going to act. And California is a prime example of that. So, I think there's a cultural piece, but then there's also the United States is a different animal based on states' rights.
Very interesting. So I'd like to go to another question that's in the chat, and thank you, Lars, for putting it in there. So he said, to all speakers, As digital services work across borders easily and help patients in several countries, how can we achieve a global consensus on a global governance of these systems in an inclusive and fair way? Can this be the WHO, the World Health Organization, or the UN, the United Nations? Or does it have to be NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or IEEE, or another organization? And I'll add that either exists now or doesn't exist yet. So what are some of our opinions? I think this could be a quite wide answer opportunity.
Okay, so sorry, I can hold back. So we do have a lot in there, and I've been working with my startup on improving hand hygiene for 10 years and working with WHO to get that kind of quality assurances, digital health to as many people as we can to save lives. I've been starting up with some colleagues a sustainable robotics initiative to make sure that we try to bring all these the benefits of technology to people and society. So I think none of these can individually solve the issue. So neither WHO nor the UN, no one can or really do the big game changer. They can't impose. It would be a utopia to say that like from tomorrow on the UN will tell you what to think. I mean we used to have that USSR, but it's different. So we really want to keep it open, diverse, which means there are going to be flaws, especially on a global scale. What I think we can use to build and keep again the trust in these big brands. So if we maintain a healthy UN, UNESCO, WHO, organizations that people can trust, then we can hope that there are going to be some curvatures and some roller coaster effect along the centuries to come. But hopefully, as a humanity, we can move to the right direction together. But it's not easy, and it's not coming overnight.
It's not. And what role do you think IEEE can play in this, Tomas? I mean,
we are one of those big brands.
Right.
So when we think becoming like advisors on policies, here in Europe now we are working directly together with the European Committee, and there's like a joint interest group, affiliation group, the IEEE, ISO, and the European Robotics Initiative, so that we all together try to advise and do some influence on policies regarding AI and robotics at the EU level. So I think these are happening really.
Very good. Do we think that there is another type of global organization we should try to create at some point that would actually bring this together more systematically? Because I know IEEE and ISO, we work together, and then there's UL, and there's this, and there's that. Not that we need another governance structure, but is that a possibility, or would that help us?
I guess my default setting would be, and I keep bringing up the Linux example. I don't want a centralized organization that is then, it goes through that or it doesn't happen at all. I like the idea of multiple centers competing with one another and working independently, and again allowing people to modulate their particular preferences on all of these variables. Otherwise, you get sort of middle of the road privacy run by a large government agency that has its own peculiar incentives. And if you want to err on the side of, I'm happy to have my data out there, I want devices to make me feel better and to get, deal with my illness, and I want it now or next week or next year, as opposed to waiting 15 years for the one choke point to solve it. So I'm one of those who would kind of shudder a bit at the thought of, let's build a brand new centralized structure to run this stuff.
I guess as most people feel that way. We don't need more governance, we need more action maybe. But any other comments on that?
Well, I would add in the advocacy world, one of the things that we like to do are build coalitions aligned with standardized principles that we all support, right? So you can bring organizations together aligned to certain principles that you're trying to advocate. And in this space, I think we haven't done that yet. So maybe that's something that the IEEE can do in their leadership role, is bring other stakeholders together aligned with goals and principles that they would like nations to adopt. And then bring them forward as we are addressing this problem.
That's a very interesting point. I think I was mentioning that for this P2933 working group we have on clinical IoT and TIPPSS, we're the first working group to be developing a standard together between IEEE and Underwriters Laboratories. Usually one organization creates it and then kind of shares it, like, oh, here you go, ISO, oh, here you go, UL. But we're doing this together from the beginning. And that's one of the ideas, Jen, actually, that we had, is that if we do this together from the beginning, then we can create something that we all agree is a good idea. We each have different roles in it. There's going to be conformity assessment, there may be maturity models, as William was talking about, and we can actually work on this together. And that's one of the reasons that we did that. But there is more to do. And I really love your thoughts on that. So thank you for that. Very interesting. Okay. That is the way to go. Very good. So we've been through the polls now. And so now we'd like to go to some more questions that we have. I think we've talked about a number of these already, but at the intersection of technology and policy, we talked about some of the challenges and opportunities. I'd like to hear from the audience, the participants or the panelists, if you have other thoughts that you want to share about the tech challenges and opportunities at this intersection of technology and policy. One of the things that we do in IEEE sometimes, I don't know if any of you have been involved in this. Tomas, you've been involved with IEEE for a while, maybe you have, but we've had these Etap workshops before, experts in technology and policy, where we bring them together, right? And so when we actually started this TIPPSS journey in 2016, we had a technical workshop one day, had about, I don't know, 100 people maybe, came out with a report from that, but we took the learnings from that. And the next day we had a policy discussion. We brought the technologists in, the chief information security officers, the technology leaders from industry, nonprofits, and academia, and then brought the, as we say in the US, the three-letter agencies in, to kind of talk about the challenges and opportunities. And one of the things that Marie is going to be sharing later on about our plans for next year to continue this discussion and then try to get some of this technology and policy work moving forward is to consider how we can have kind of local events, whether they're virtual, hybrid, or in person, as we have all these variants we're dealing with, where we can actually have these technology and policy discussions within a framework, where there are policies that apply in Hungary that may not apply in the US or may not apply in Africa. So are there any other ideas that people have on how we can address the challenges and opportunities at this intersection of technology and policy? Okay, maybe not. So we'll go on.
No, I was going to say, I was waiting at the risk of sounding somewhat repetitive. It is this decentralized, multi-centralized approach. If you look back, it's quite fascinating. If you look back 20 years, no more than that, at the doomsayers about the prospects for e-commerce. People, some of the best minds in the world, some of the people I respect the most, thought you're really not going to be able to get much e-commerce because we're never going to be able to get the privacy, the trust aspects. And so e-commerce is just a non-starter. And I'm trying to think who it was, but I read a leading light on that who owned up to the error of that thinking some years later and said, well, that was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made in anticipating that. And so I think it's a great exercise to go back and just look at, in e-commerce, how did we get to such really an incredible point of trust? I mean, the whole world economy in the last 2 years during COVID has been run on people ordering stuff over the internet, and it's worked remarkably well. I don't have to leave the house anymore. The doorbell rings day and night. And how did we get to that point? And it wasn't a centralized agency that was going to say, we order everyone to trust.
Isn't that an interesting point? You're absolutely right. I actually, what that brings me to is artificial intelligence and machine learning as well, which can help us in these different frames, and how you may remember, Bob, you and I may have been around back then, if you're like artificial intelligence expert systems, that's never going to work. Oh, forget about it. And now like we're all doing this stuff, right? And it's not perfect, but none of us are perfect, by the way. But there were so many naysayers, and there are actually leaders in information technology that I know in different places that still say that. Like 2 years ago, they said this artificial intelligence, this is never going to take off. Remember in the 70s? I'm like, that was a long time ago, right? But there are people who are kind of still connected to the past and can't get us to the future. But using like real life examples, like online commerce, I order stuff from all over the place, right? Or if I order it from Amazon here, it's actually being, delivered from China or Taiwan or Germany. I got these cute little rollers, like, for Christmas cookies that came from Austria, I think. Why do I trust this stuff, right?
In 2000, I went on some business to Kazakhstan, and I got there after midnight. And in this darkened place, I put my bank card into an ATM, and out came all of this money. And I just marveled. I said, how did this happen? Why does that machine trust who I am and what this card is?
Very interesting. So that brings us to the trust point again. And Axel, I know you put something into the chat before about trust. Axel, I don't know if you're able to speak at this point, if you're in a place where you can talk, but Axel Wirth is actually one of the leaders on P2933 of the subgroup on protection, safety, and security, and working with the trust and identity team as well. And he was mentioning in here, it's also about patient trust, in a provider or in a specific medical technology. What if we have a cybersecurity incident leading to patient harm, and as a result have patients rejecting their device-based interventions because of what they've been hearing on the evening news? I guess from one perspective, it may be, actually, I don't think it's good that they don't know about all the, DHS certs coming out about cybersecurity acts of devices, including heart devices, as well as, insulin pumps. But as they learn about that, will they be dissuaded? And should they be dissuaded? This whole trust issue is very large, as you all were saying. So I'd be interested in thoughts, about that, either technology innovations that you know of that are going to help on the trust side, or the human condition, or policy. Any thoughts on the trust element a little bit more?
Another example, just to spin that thought, right, is also the trust of a clinician in the data they're looking at, right? One of the examples I frequently use is that data integrity or the compromise of data integrity is a risk, but even the perception of compromised integrity is already a risk, right? So I think there are a lot of very indirect consequences that we tend to overlook by focusing on the more technical consequences, and those are the patient's trust and medical decisions related to their devices, pacemakers and insulin pumps, and you name it, or the clinician's trust in the data they're looking at and consequently impact on decisions, right? There's really a huge gray zone which we tend to overlook by focusing on the more technical side of the problem.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And as Axel knows, that's part of what we're working on in this working group is how do you actually make sure that if there's invalid data, how are you doing checking, from device to device, is it the right human? Should they still be? Are they still certified? Should they be in there? There are so many questions to ask. In a way, it's good people don't know that these are issues, but they are. And so those are some of the things that we're working on. And so hopefully after we get some of these answers out there, what we're hoping to do is to better inform the public and patients and citizens about what they should be asking for so they can protect themselves.
So Florence, you touched on that actually a moment ago, and also earlier in this excellent webinar. And that's the question, where can policy help? And I think the way I look at it right now, and where there's a big gap, is that with regards to security vulnerabilities, safety risks resulting from those vulnerabilities, we live in a world of very dirty data. There's a lot of information out there published by CISA, by HISAC, by the FDA, by NVD, you name it, about technical vulnerabilities. And I don't think that we have really found a way to draw a clean line from all this messy data to what does it actually mean for clinical care and patient safety. You know, I think we tend, and I don't think we can do any better right now, but I think we should strive to learn how to do better. You know, we got overwhelmed with yet another vulnerability disclosure. I mean, this morning I saw another one from Philips, and I don't want to pick on Philips here just because I saw it earlier, with their patient monitoring devices. But what does it actually mean for the clinical use of that device and the actual realistic risk to patient safety? I think our messaging and our analysis is still way too fuzzy to allow us to take the right action with the limited resources we have.
No, you're right. The good news is that, and this is an IEEE event, but we just happen to know a lot of what's going on because none of us are involved there. There is another working group in the Engineering Medicine Biology Society space that's working on data set quality in connected healthcare. And so looking at some of those things, and it includes, is it dirty data? Is it validated data? Who validated it? When did they validate it? How did they validate it? Does it have to be validated again? Did it change since then? Did it move since then? What about data at rest? What about data in motion? But then also the bias and the ethics issues, right? Is it all the data that they should be considering? Is it the right data they should be considering? Do people who need access to that data have access to it? You know, especially the underserved. What is it that we need to do? And so it was very interesting when they brought that forward initially on the standards committee. They mentioned bias, and we said, you really need to unpack bias. There's so many implications. And you know what? It's very cultural too. If you grow up in if you live in a very homogeneous environment where everyone is just like you, bias isn't as big an issue, or you might not think about it as much as compared to a very heterogeneous environment where there's so many different types of humans with so many different backgrounds, sociological, economic, political, ethnic, gender-based, such a range of uncertainty, that bias has so many facets. And so when you look at data set quality, it's just not like, okay, oh yeah, 1 is 1, that's correct, and 1 + 1 is 2. It's like, wait a second, are you using all the data? Who has access to it? What does it interact with? Where are you using it? There are just so many issues to think about. So it's not just dirty data, but it's the whole frame of what data you choose to use and not choose to use. And one of the things that we look at a lot is when people are deciding on a certain treatment or something. Are they really looking at everything? So like when a number of years ago, there were a couple of men who worked with me that had breast cancer scares. And I remember I was thinking, what? And when you look at a lot of the science that have been or research have been done, you wonder, are they including enough men? Is it really focused on women because we tend to have it a lot? Are they including the whole aperture? And it can be other aspects as well. So it's the completeness of data, it's the clarity of the data, and it's making sure that it's correct. And I see Jen nodding a lot. So I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add to that.
Well, that's why we are very excited to be part of the NIH AIM Ahead project. And, as the safety net anchor for data, we are really excited about looking at machine learning and artificial intelligence within the underserved communities and making sure that folks can participate that are underrepresented to help make the invisible visible. So we're really excited about that, and we're really excited about the administration really leaning into this space and trying to make sure that everyone can participate within data in the healthcare arena.
And on that point, Jen, I don't know that everybody knows what AIM Ahead is. I do, just because I'm in the big data space and AI. Could you talk a little bit about AIM Ahead? I think it's an NIH program.
It is an NIH program, and it's being led by the National Institutes of Health. The The program is a large-scale endeavor to look at artificial intelligence and machine learning within the most medically and socially vulnerable patients across the country. And it will be anchored out of the University of North Texas. OCHIN is there are, I believe, 4 nodes underneath that, and OCHIN's one of the nodes. So we're really excited to be part of that. And I'll put a link into the chat because I know we're running short on time.
Oh, actually, no, we're doing okay. So we have time, but thank you. Yeah, please do. And I know Orlando is online. Orlando is actually from the National Institutes of Health, and he's actually leading some of the interoperability work that we've been talking about for the P2933 working group on TIPPSS. So Orlando, and then Simone is on as well from UCSF. If you have any comments about this discussion, that would be great.
Yeah, hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Florence, for the invitation to this conversation. It's very critical, essential topic here. Definitely the intersection of policy with actual, technology development and discovery needs to take a major role, I think. Well, especially the technology moves so fast, and policy regulations, tend to lag, and that's just the nature of things. And so definitely, I guess the comment from, I forgot who made it, but about like there's a lot of dirty data out there. I think that kind of, resonated with me because we have so much data now available. Historically, there's just tons of legacy data out there that, really came before the influx of AI, machine learning, data science capabilities became more common. And so the notion of being able to leverage all this existing data is a huge challenge. How do we retrofit all this data that was retrospectively available, and now how can we make sense of that without having to invest in entirely new research to regenerate this data? So that's one question that I think is important. So the topic of data readiness, data engineering, data structuring, I think is very important in the context of enabling future capabilities of these intelligent systems, intelligent tools, and infrastructure. And so there's a lot of conversations around the different government, non-government entities, to try to come up with better approaches, better consensus in a way to be able to come together and establish some rules for the game as to how we can share the data. So from the perspective of human data, like patient, human subject data, I think it's really important to make the patient, the subjects, at the center of the conversation. And I think that that's happening. There's a lot of activity around the ONC, for instance, the Office of the National Coordinator. They're really pushing for the adoption of FHIR standards, HL7, to be able to, and actually it's going to become an expectation in the future to have interoperable systems, to be able to share EHR data and so on. So that's, I think, a really significant push. But from the earlier sort of stages in the preclinical or clinical research arena, I think it's important for folks to think about consented versus unconsented data, and what that means from a sharing perspective, and what could be accessible for deriving knowledge and deriving new science, new innovation. And so now it's becoming, I think, a really important consideration to think about dynamic consent for subjects, human subjects, and what that means. There's the right to be forgotten, and the GDPR in Europe, and some other policies and expectations in the US and across the world. So looking at how privacy and identity are secured and protected is really important, but in a dynamic sense. So having the data be accessible by certain parties and not others, or certain lengths of time versus others, and so on and so on. I think that becomes a really critical paradigm change from the perspective that now the humans in the future, as things are moving forward, especially with the onset of blockchain and other federated infrastructures, that the humans, we're going to come to a point, hopefully, where everybody's going to have ownership of their own data. And that's really going to change the paradigm as to how data is going to be viewed and utilized, and the value of data is going to be maximized because of that. The other aspect that I think is important is that while everybody might have ownership of their own data, maybe not everybody will want to have ownership of their data, or may want to, or may know what to do with their data. And so then there is a potential opportunity, and there is an opportunity for sort of like third-party agents to provide this sort of digital services, like overseeing or management of people's data, according to their particular needs, curation of data, being able to highlight certain aspects that are critical. Maybe not everybody understands the medical record, right? So there could be room for harmonizing certain policies and regulations on governance around these third-party agents that might start rolling into the space. And I think that could create some opportunities for structuring the policies and merging some structure around those expectations to enable data sharing. And the final comment, I think it's also important from a technology development perspective. Being at NIH, and I spent some time at FDA in my previous life, but kind of looking at the entire sort of spectrum from like really early stage basic science, risk discovery science, and the pipeline of preclinical to translational and clinical research. There are certain topics that are not necessarily considered at the early stages of technology development that could become very important and really essential to move technologies along the pipeline. So sort of thinking with the end in mind, and maybe thinking of like a quality by design sort of perspective. A lot of academics don't think that way, because they're just more in the research sort of focused aspect, which is fine. I mean, that's their main goal there. But I think educating some of the academic early stage researchers around some of the quality expectations, some of the potential standards in certain areas, that could be really important things to include in their early stage designs, I think could really help sort of push the envelope a bit on the adoption and integration of some of these considerations that will become requirements when these technologies mature and get to like FDA or other regulatory bodies. So I'll just leave it there, but those are just a couple of thoughts and situations that I think are important. And of course, standards development is all sort of in the pipeline that really helps move things along in that way. So thank you.
Very interesting perspectives, Orlando. And if anybody wants to look at the baseline of healthcare data, it would be very interesting if any of you have heard of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And so if you talk to a medical student today, they still talk about HeLa cells. And these cells were taken from Henrietta Lacks in the 1950s. She didn't know that they were going to do anything with them. They replicate so well that they're still replicating today, and they're used for clinical research. It's very interesting. And this is the base for a lot of the discussions we have about privacy and data ownership. You may have seen the movie, Oprah Winfrey is in it, but you can read the book. And I found it fascinating when I read it. And it gives you a very good baseline to think of all the issues and the underserved, and they had no idea, and then how did they get the data? How can they take back control? Well, no, there was nothing to sign back then, right? So a lot of these things need to change, and they have been, but it's a very interesting read, or watch the movie if you don't want to read the book.
I'd say I was just going to say it's a really worthwhile book. And it is worth noting, as you alluded, it didn't violate any ethical standards of the times. There were no rules, and the rules sort of developed spontaneously, which will take me to a point that Orlando made. It was very, very good. I appreciated his comments. And I'll disagree with him, which also disagrees with me, when he said we'll all own our data. And I have written that any number of times. But then there's on the other hand part, we have to be careful about thinking about what that means. So there's an awful lot of health data contained in my Apple Watch, and it's very valuable to Apple. That's they use the data, and if I own it, it's going to change the dynamics of what they want to produce for their watch. And is it worth it for me to own this data if it means Apple's going to say, we're not developing this stuff anymore, it's not valuable anymore because it's not ours. So again, there's this trying to avoid absolute homogeneity in all of the rules. And I don't have an answer where you draw the line on that. I just know it's not here or here. It's somewhere in the middle.
Very interesting. Yeah, it kind of goes into the ether at some point, right? So, and maybe the data sharing and interoperability is one of the aspects that enables that not to be like a lock-in like you're talking about, and then you won't have access to it. Very, very, very interesting. And actually on that topic, Orlando, I'm wondering if you could say a few words about the maturity model that you're looking at creating, or maturity models in this space. I think that might be interesting for folks.
Sure. Well, it's still a work in progress. So yeah, but it's definitely, I think definitely something very important to think about across the different TIPPSS principles. And so we're looking to structure a first version of what that might look like. And so I've been specifically leading the interoperability subgroup in the P2933 standards effort. And so with that in mind, I think the interoperability aspect, as some of the discussion has led here, it's a really significant cornerstone of enabling this sustainability and scalability of all these technologies, and also their convergence, right? Because so we're now thinking about all these different TIPPSS principles, and there is a really important trade-off between them. They're all coupled in some way in order to achieve the trust and the performance that is needed for all these systems. We need to think about holistically in the context of all these different TIPPSS principles coming together to meet a particular set of requirements based on an indication for use that the manufacturer is looking to design and develop. And then also, so we're looking at a very first layer. So we're looking at, the maturity model will have a number of different levels, starting out with the basic level of, in the context of connected health systems, the very basic level of connectivity, maybe a device to device type of scenario, and then scaling that up to multiple devices, being able to plug and play into an ecosystem. And of course, looking at the multiple streams of data with multiple different infrastructures, private, secure networks, edge computing, and then, emerging future trends like quantum computing. What's that going to sort of do to this type of infrastructure? So we're looking at the different levels of maturity across the different TIPPSS principles, and trying to understand the interplay between them. For instance, a very basic example is, of course, as we want to have more interoperability across an ecosystem of connected devices, then we may need to start looking more closely at the security factors, because then security might become compromised if we start just plugging in all kinds of different devices into the same ecosystem. So then we need to, start formulating certain aspects and considerations to security, as well as, privacy and authentication of the devices and so on. So those are just some examples there. And just to make another follow-up comment to the previous comment around the ownership of data, that's a very good point. I think it kind of goes to the incentives in the industry, and then also the users to be able to convey those, and then there's always going to be a market, right, for something. But I think those trends could create diversions in the market, and I think a very similar sort of point of consideration that we are facing now and has sort of evolved in the recent past is interoperability. So what is the incentive for manufacturers to make their systems interoperable? And I think there was a comment earlier about the imaging developers, imaging scanner developers. And that's something, I come from an imaging background, and I very much understand that example, and definitely appreciate and recognize some of the challenges there. And we've come a very long way from the imaging perspective to be able to really maximize the readability of the imaging data that is really driving a revolution in medical care right now. But it took a long time to be able to get to this point. And so imaging scanning system developers are, I think, quite few compared to, let's say, the IoT world. I mean, if we compared how many imaging system developers are there compared to IoT developers, we can kind of maybe anticipate a significant challenge to incentivize folks from the interoperability perspective there, but also from the ownership of data perspective. I think it might just be that it could create a need for additional layers of development from a technology perspective to curate to the needs of the people that own the data. Like I mentioned, not everybody may be up to speed on everything they need to do. It's sort of like maybe like a credit report, I guess, or credit scoring system. I don't know. There might be some agents that could help you sort of navigate that data and the process of everything that comes along with that. But yeah, but in terms of the maturity model, it is a work in progress, and we're looking to to really understand the landscape of all these different parameters, and then come to a way where we can actually understand how we could best characterize a specific intersection points, across all these different factors and considerations, and come up with criteria, and that hopefully we can provide as recommendations to these developers as they move along in the process of R&D of the systems.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Orlando. And Maria graciously put in information. It's free to participate in the working groups that we have in this space. And so you don't have to pay anything. You don't even have to be an IEEE member, very honestly, unless you want to vote on it. So there's more information that we just put into the chat again that Maria had in there before if you want to learn more about this working group. And then you can always look at this book, Women Securing the Future with Tips for IoT. And then we have a new one coming out next year that's in production right now on connected healthcare. So, stay in the know, stay in the discussion. Jen, you had something in the chat before about workforce, and that was a very interesting point. It's kind of a different angle than what we've been talking about, but it's very relevant. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what you're thinking, where you were saying we don't have enough people skilled in this area, and we need to incentivize this from public policy. So how would that affect workforce?
Yeah, thanks for picking this up, Florence. For OCHIN, this is a big issue, and for those that we serve, it's a big issue. And I think it's foundational to the fact that, and it was aligned with an article I recently read, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, around getting rid of your IT department, right? That segmented away is IT. healthcare is even more extreme, and that the healthcare technology piece is like, yeah, that's nice, it's over here. It's not integrated as foundational. And so in the United States, the workforce development that we have for, and the incentives that we have for healthcare workforce are not aligned around IT, informatics, data. It is all aligned about care delivery. And so we have a skilling problem within healthcare technology overall. And when you think about cyber, so if we have an issue at the health information technology piece, especially those in the most underserved environments, it only is magnified with, there's nobody around for cyber. And that was one of the big challenges that we faced with several folks that we work with that have had cyber issues, is who to call. I mean, who is addressing it in their own shop, and then who do you call afterwards? And so, this may not be an issue ex-US, but I can tell you workforce and having the skilling in health information technology and in cyber is something that we have to think about as part of the care delivery system and not in a separate bucket. And so right now there are no programs to incentivize workforce development in health technology or in cybersecurity. And we need to do that to be able to bring more people into the conversation to understand how to address it. And then it becomes a more competitive market too, right? Right now, we're seeing inflation in this space rapidly because we don't have the skilled workforce. And so it is foundational to this conversation. It's also foundational for the future. So that's what I would add. So we need to incentivize workforce development in health information and technology and cybersecurity.
I love that point. That will help us address a lot of these challenges and get more brains in the boat with us too. That's a great point, Jen. Very good.
I can jump in on my heterogeneity stuff. One of the problems is the system that we've had for about 110 years for educating doctors and for licensing them has funneled it into heterogeneity, that every doctor comes out of medical school the same way. You don't have people specializing in, I will be a doctor specializing in cyber medicine. Something I write on a lot, but we need to rethink the way we educate all of the healthcare workforce and the way we license them.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree. Well, this has been an excellent discussion, and I want to thank you all for participating. We're going to close out so we can meet our commitment of going until just 1 o'clock Eastern today. So this workshop has been recorded and it'll be available for on-demand viewing, and we'll notify all the participants when it becomes available. There will also be a documented summary of the breakout of the sessions, which will be made available. And we want to thank Macy for writing that, our student at Columbia University who's graduating in a couple of weeks. We're very excited for her, and she's done a great job. We hate how they graduate, but they really are supposed to graduate, but they're wonderful when they're here. So really want to thank her for all of her great work on this project and others. And at the close, we'll post a link in the chat to complete the post-event evaluation. And we'd love to hear your feedback because we're going to be continuing to use that as we plan for next year. And, as more information comes out, invite your colleagues to review the recordings, invite your colleagues to participate in the future. So we'll be back in 2022. And so Maria, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to mention here about the 2022 focus for the Global Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity Series.
So hi, everybody. Yes, we plan on bringing the series, and I think Florence highlighted it and previewed well that the idea is we all know this is a global issue, and we would like to take this topic and really go in at a hyper-local level. So our goal is to have 5 sessions virtual next year across 5 continents with speakers from the area, and obviously the majority of the audience from that region, to really start to hash out these topics. And if hopefully Omicron won't wreak havoc on all of us in 2022, but our goal is to potentially have at least one face-to-face event, most likely in the latter half of the year, to bring topically us back face to face and really hash out these discussions and that kind of thing. But all registrants will be notified of the upcoming schedule. They're still welcome to participate in these regional webinar sessions, and we'll keep everybody posted. So I did put the link in the chat as well to everybody. And if you could just share your feedback with us on this particular workshop. I was very impressed with the speakers, and I'm also thankful that some of our old speakers, such as Orlando and Simona, came back to join us. They were in the previous sessions earlier in the year. And of course, always thankful to Florence for being such a great moderator and host, and our current panelists. They gave such great insights, and hopefully something to think about at the end of the year. This was the finale for this first year series, and I think they really ended it on a great positive note. So from this point, just any of you who's all very interested on the policy side, we actually just did a whole mini series in September, October, looking at different policy, US policy teams, actually testing and playing with technologies. And their idea was to talk about outcomes and see how they can contribute towards policy development when it comes to either using AI or the issue of interoperability or just data monetization. It was a really great series. It's free for you. Anybody wants to attend. They're all on demand, and they're very recent, September, October. So please, at any time, visit the website, and we'll include this information in our thank you email as well. And that's it. I do a lot of outreach. As you can see, we do WAMI, we did the cybersecurity workshop, we do the podcast series. All of this is, we work with all the volunteers to share the insights like they've done today, but to educate our audience, but as well as to hopefully inspire them to get involved in standards development to address these ongoing issues that we keep seeing from the use of these technologies or applications and that kind of thing. So I want to thank you, all the audience, for being here with us today. I greatly appreciate it, and we wish you to continue to stay safe and well, and have a great holiday season.
And thank you to all the speakers and all the participants, our prior panelists, and today. You did a wonderful job, and thank you for leading us into the future. And everyone be safe.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.